everyone. I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life and No Bullshit Bodybuilding, and tonight I'm bringing you the next installment of the Lifting for Life Q&A series. And today I'd like to answer a question which was actually just asked to me or of me by Dylan Gargan, who some of you will know is one of the first 100 people who ever liked the original MBB Facebook page. So I'm giving you a shout out, Dylan. Obviously your question got prioritized for that reason. But in all seriousness, Dylan asked me in an Instagram Live Q&A that I just did whether or not one needs to be in a calorie surplus to gain muscle. And I felt that there's such a good discussion to be had around this question that I wanted to take it out of that context and talk about it on a bigger platform. So thank you to Dylan for that. And if you aren't following me on Instagram, I encourage you to do so. The information is in the description box below. And I have been doing probably 5 to 7, typically short, admittedly, Instagram Live Q&As recently. I'm considering doing more of them. I've been doing daily 30-minute Facebook Q&As, so I would encourage you to follow me there as well. In any case, I'm doing my best to perpetually increase my engagement with you. So with that overly long intro out of the way, let's answer the question, do you need to be in a calorie surplus to gain muscle? And for those of you who might be unaware of what it is we mean by calorie surplus, it means that typically, it means that in some period, the total amount of energy that you ingest exceeds the amount of energy that you expend. So interestingly, that doesn't necessarily have to refer to a day. One could even say, I was in an overall energy surplus in this period of a month, meaning total number of calories ingested over a month exceeded those expended. But the overwhelming majority of the time, what's meant is on a daily basis. So to use an example, if you expend exactly 3,000 calories, first of all, that's interesting, probably highly unlikely. But if you expend 3,000 and ingest 3,500, then you're in an energy surplus because 3,500 is greater than 3,000. And I'm realizing this is perhaps an extremely simplistic discussion, but I wanted to make sure everyone's on the same page. Now, with regard to building muscle, I think the traditional reasoning is, well, muscle has to come from something, right? I mean, if you initially weigh 200 at a certain body fat and you bulk to 220 and your body fat's basically the same and you've gained a bunch of muscle, I mean, that doesn't just come out of thin air. Like, you need extra energy for that muscle. Like, it's simply not possible to have more muscle than you have now without being in an energy surplus. And I would acknowledge that that's very intuitively plausible. Indeed, in the past, probably 5, 6, or more years ago, I believe that as well. I thought I'm like gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, obvious bullshit, bro science. And no, you're either in a surplus, gaining muscle and fat, or in a deficit, losing muscle and fat. And you can modulate that a little bit, but still, it's fairly rigid. Now, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that intuition can fail us. I think very often it's actually reliable, but there are situations in which better evidence contradicts it, and we need to go with that better evidence. So in this case, I think the way to approach the question is to take a step back and ask, from a mechanistic perspective, what do we need to gain muscle? And I think we'll find that in answering that question, we come to the conclusion, hey, we don't actually have to be in an energy surplus. So first of all, we want the initial stimulus for muscle growth, resistance training. So if we ask, okay, well, what is the significance of that? Like, why does resistance training cause muscle growth? I think there are a number of different ways to answer that. I think the best way to answer it in this context is to say resistance training, typically one might say, increases muscle protein synthesis, which is true. But I think a better way of putting it is to say it increases the ceiling for maximal muscle protein balance after training, which is to say the total amount of protein which can be used to build muscle is greater after resistance training than if no resistance training occurred. Because interestingly, if you take a completely sedentary person who is fasted and you look at muscle protein balance and then you give them a bolus of high quality protein, they're going to build muscle. Like some amount of muscle protein is going to get built. That happens. Like otherwise, it would literally not be possible to have skeletal muscle without resistance training. So what resistance training does is increases the ceiling, increases the maximum amount of protein which can be integrated into muscle. So that's part of it. We want the stimulus. Now notice something I've mentioned repeatedly is what that does is increases the ceiling of protein, really amino acids, which can be integrated into skeletal muscle. Okay, well you need the amino acids, right? Or the way I wanted to say that was you need the amino acids, right? In particular, the essential amino acids, in being essential meaning the body can't synthesize them itself, you need to ingest those. Otherwise what you have is a stimulus for muscle growth and then inadequate actual substrate to be used to build muscle. So you have stimulus, then amino acid, the amino acids, which literally become the muscle. And I almost left it there, but I also think one needs to mention the fact that building muscle is an energetically costly process, which means a lot of energy is expended in actually building the muscle. And it's worth pointing out that this isn't surplus energy because it's energy which is ingested and expended. Whereas the amino acids that are used to build the skeletal muscle, that is actually excess energy because it isn't expended, it goes into the tissue. But we do need that energy to actually build the muscle, to actually fuel the process. So let's take a shot at an analogy and see how terrible it turns out. If you want to build a house, you need someone saying, okay, we're building a house, this is what we do, here's the plan, go and put the bricks over here. You actually need the raw materials. You can't just be like, yeah, house, up here. Maybe try it, it would be a nice joke, but it doesn't actually work. You need the physical raw materials. So this is the analogy for the amino acids. And then you also need fuel for the workers building the house, because otherwise they can't function. And that's the analogy for the energy used and expended in actually building muscle. So I will grant that this is a deliberately simplistic analysis. I'm not saying, ooh, look, anabolic signaling doesn't matter, all of the things that I haven't touched on and to a large extent don't understand because there are people who've probably dedicated their entire lives to understanding two pathways in particular that are related to hypertrophy. I do think that this is roughly adequate in answering this question. And notice that none of these entails an overall 24-hour energy surplus because, and I'm not speaking to particular context, I'm not saying this definitely happened to this person, but you could expend 3,000 calories a day and ingest 2,500 calories a day, therefore you're in an energy deficit, you're expending more than you're ingesting, but that doesn't cause to be necessarily the case not having that stimulus for muscle growth. I mean, you can still resistance train in a deficit. You can still, it doesn't entail you not having the amino acids. You can still ingest enough high quality protein when you're in a deficit. Indeed, a lot of people ingest a lot more protein when they're in a deficit, so it's definitely not a problem. And I think potentially the most problematic aspect, although you can also come at this in terms of decreases in training volume due to having less energy, so I think that's significant, but additionally, ingesting less energy can mean less energy being directed toward synthesizing muscle protein, and that can be problematic. But that doesn't mean that you can't build any muscle. I would say the most reasonable perspective to have on this would be to say that means the likelihood of you building muscle is probably lower, and if you do build muscle, you probably build less. But that's different than none. So ultimately, this comes down to, if we just look at what we need to build muscle, I just don't see any reason to think that over a whole day you have to be ingesting more energy than you expend. It just doesn't, there's no reason to think that's necessary, even if it might be beneficial. And so if we want to frame this differently in terms of what is it we need, now I've talked a lot about resistance training, amino acids, that energy. I would say the surplus is a surplus of amino acids within the period in which muscle is being built as a result of resistance training. So you don't need a daily energy surplus. You do need a surplus of amino acids within the anabolic window, which is likely to be, depending on your training status, I think the lowest I've ever seen is 10 hours and the highest is 72. In that period in which your body is able to build more muscle than it could if you didn't lift at all, you need an excess of amino acids if you want to maximize that anabolic response. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope this has been, I don't know why a Jason Blaha quote was the first thing that came to mind, but I do genuinely hope that this has been informative. I really enjoyed making this video, so we'll do more of these moving forward. By the way, if you liked the video, like it, comment below, let me know what you think. Let me know if this is illuminating. Share this video with anyone who you think might be misinformed on this topic, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much.